Nearly 40 farmers all made the same decision. Only one man didn't. They bought the chemical. He planted flowers. And for weeks they laughed at him for it. It started on a cold morning, early spring, in a small farming county most people outside the state had never heard of. The kind of place where news didn't travel fast, but opinions did. A man from a supply company had come in before sunrise, set up a folding table, and started talking before most of the farmers had finished their coffee. He didn't sound like a salesman. That was the trick. He sounded certain, measured, like a man explaining something obvious, not trying to convince anyone. "This solves everything," he said. "Aphids, borers, worms, all of it." He tapped the side of a bright container sitting on the table. "One treatment, guaranteed protection." The numbers made sense. The timing made sense. And most importantly, everyone else was agreeing. One by one, men stepped forward, signed their names, placed orders. Not because they were careless, because they were practical. Farming didn't leave room for risk. If something promised to protect your yield, you listened. If your neighbors were doing it, you followed. By mid-morning, almost everyone in that lot had committed, except one. He had been standing near the edge of the group the entire time, not interrupting, not arguing, just listening. His name was Daniel Mercer, 58 years old, wheat farmer, quiet enough that most people didn't notice him until he spoke. And when he did, it was only one word: no. The man at the table smiled, the way people do when they think you misunderstood something simple. He explained it again, slower this time. The results, the protection, the guarantee, the fact that nearly everyone else was already on board. Daniel listened, then shook his head. No. That was when the tone changed. Not immediately, but noticeably. A few men exchanged looks. Someone let out a quiet laugh. "Suit yourself," one of them said. "Just don't complain when your field gets eaten alive." Daniel didn't respond, didn't defend his decision, didn't try to convince anyone else. He just walked back to his truck and drove home. That afternoon, while the others were unloading containers, mixing chemicals, preparing their equipment, Daniel did something that made even less sense. He planted flowers. Not along the edges, not for decoration. Right there, between sections of his field. Bright, deliberate, completely out of place. When people saw it, the laughter came easier this time. "Lost his mind," someone said. "Refuses the only thing that works, then plants flowers like it's a garden." They didn't understand it, and they didn't try to, because to them, the situation was simple. They had protection. He didn't. They had a system. He had nothing. Or at least, that's what it looked like. The first week passed quietly. No visible difference, no immediate consequence. Just fields growing the way fields do. But underneath that surface, something had already started to change, and within a few weeks, everyone in that county was going to see it. The first signs were easy to ignore. Small things, nothing dramatic. Nothing that made anyone stop what they were doing. A few leaves, showing damage earlier than expected. Tiny marks, barely visible unless you looked closely. The kind of thing every farmer had seen before, and usually solved the same way. Add more, adjust the mix, apply again. That was the system. If something didn't work, you doubled down. Because the assumption was never that the system was wrong, only that you hadn't used enough of it yet. By the second week, the signs were harder to ignore. The damage wasn't isolated anymore. It spread from one section to another. Not fast enough to cause panic, but steady enough to raise questions. One farmer noticed it first, then another, then several more. Standing at the edge of their fields, looking at leaves that didn't look right. They compared notes. Same chemical, same timing, same results. Or at least the same problem. That wasn't supposed to happen. The product had promised protection, complete coverage, guaranteed results. So they did what made sense. They applied more. Stronger mix, higher concentration. Earlier in the morning, later in the evening. Anything to regain control. But control was already slipping. By the third week, the fields told a different story. Not uniform, not predictable, but clearly not improving. Some sections looked thin, others showed uneven growth, and in places you could see it clearly. Insects, more than before. That was when concern turned into tension, because now it didn't make sense anymore. They had used the solution, they had followed the instructions, they had done everything right. So why was it getting worse? Conversations at the co-op changed. Less confident, more questions, less laughter, more silence. Someone mentioned calling the supplier. Someone else said it was just timing. Another said the weather might be affecting it. Everyone had an explanation. None of them solved the problem. And then someone mentioned Daniel's field. At first, it was just a passing comment. His place? A few men shrugged. Didn't seem important. After all, he hadn't used the treatment. He had no protection, no system. If anything, his field should have been worse. But by the fourth week, that assumption started to break, because someone drove past his land and slowed down, looked out across the field, and saw something that didn't match what was happening everywhere else. They didn't say anything right away, didn't want to be wrong, didn't want to overreact, but they noticed. And once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. Because what they saw was a field that looked normal, healthy, untouched. And right through the middle of it, lines of flowers, standing exactly where everyone had laughed at them. The first man didn't stop his truck. He just slowed down, looked across the field, and kept driving. Because what he saw didn't make sense. The wheat looked normal. Not perfect, not dramatically different, but not damaged either. not like the fields he had just left behind. No thinning patches, no uneven color, no signs of stress spreading outward, and most importantly, no visible swarm of insects. He drove another mile, then slowed again, checked his mirrors, then turned the truck around. This time, he stopped. He stepped out, walked to the edge of the field, and stood there, just looking. Not searching, not inspecting, just trying to understand what he was seeing. The difference wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious from a distance, but once you stood there, you could feel it. The plants were stronger, leaves intact, growth consistent, no signs of panic in the field. And then there were the flowers, bright lines cutting through the wheat, not random, not decorative, placed with intention. He walked closer, knelt down, looked beneath the leaves. That's when he saw it. Insects, but not the kind he expected, not the kind eating the crop. Different ones, moving through the plants, active, present, but not destructive. That was the moment things shifted, because now it wasn't just about one field, it was about a pattern that no longer made sense. By the next day, 2 more farmers had stopped to look, then 3, then more. Not all at once, not publicly, but quietly, one at a time. Each one walking to the edge of that field, each one seeing the same thing and leaving without saying much, because saying it out loud would mean admitting something, that maybe they had gotten it wrong. Back at the co-op, the conversations changed again. Less about solutions, more about Daniel. What exactly did he plant? Why flowers? Is that what's keeping the insects away? No one had a clear answer, because no one had asked him. Not seriously, not when it mattered. The same men who had laughed now avoided the subject, changed it, redirected the conversation, because the alternative was uncomfortable. If the flowers worked, then the chemical didn't. And if the chemical didn't work, then everything they had done, everything they had paid for, everything they had trusted, had made things worse. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It built, slowly, piece by piece. But once it started, there was no way to stop it. And sooner or later, they were all going to have to face the same question. Not about the chemical, not about the insects, but about the man who had said no. It didn't happen all at once. No one gathered a group. No one made an announcement. Because admitting you were wrong rarely happens in public. The first man who went to Daniel's farm went alone. Late afternoon, parked his truck at the edge of the road, sat there for a moment, then stepped out. He didn't call ahead, didn't know what he would say, just walked up the dirt path toward the house. Daniel was out back, working, the same way he always did. No rush, no sign that anything unusual had happened. The man stopped a few steps away, cleared his throat. "You got a minute?" Daniel looked up, nodded once, set his tools down, walked over. For a second, neither of them spoke, because both of them knew what this was about. Finally, the man gestured toward the field. "Your wheat," he said. "It's different." Daniel followed his gaze, looked out across the rows the same way he had every day, then nodded again. "It is." The man shifted his weight, uncomfortable now, because this wasn't a conversation he was used to having. "What did you do?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't know, but because the answer wasn't simple. "It's not what I did," he said. "It's what I didn't do." The man frowned, didn't understand. Daniel walked toward the field, motioned for him to follow. They stepped between the rows, past the wheat, toward the strips of flowers. Up close, it was easier to see. Not just the plants, but what moved between them. Small insects, moving in patterns, not random, not destructive. "They're not gone," Daniel said. "The ones that eat your crop, they're still out here." The man looked down, confused. "Then why aren't they doing damage?" Daniel pointed, not at the wheat, at the flowers. "They don't have time," he said. The man stared at him, still not understanding. So Daniel explained. "You didn't just kill the pests," he said. "You killed everything that kept them in check. The ones that hunt them, the ones that balance them." The man's expression changed, slightly, because now it was starting to make sense. "The flowers," he said. "They bring them back?" Daniel nodded. "Not bring them back," he said. "Keep them here. Give them a reason to stay." The man looked across the field again. Same land, same season, completely different outcome. And the difference was something he hadn't even considered. Not more control, not stronger protection, but balance. He didn't say much after that, didn't argue, didn't defend what he had done, because there was nothing left to defend. Before he left, he paused at the edge of the field, looked back once more, then said quietly, "I thought you were wrong." Daniel nodded. "I know." That was the moment everything changed. Not in the field, in the way people started to think about it. The next changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. Not when they require people to admit something they've already paid for was the wrong choice. That fall, most of the farmers stayed quiet. They finished the season, collected what they could, adjusted numbers, and told themselves next year would be different. Because that's what people do. They don't change immediately. They wait until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. And the evidence was already building. Lower yields, higher costs, more applications, less control. The same solution creating the same problem again and again. Meanwhile, Daniel did nothing new. No upgrades, no extra treatments, no changes to what had already worked. He planted his flowers again. Same rows, same spacing, Same quiet routine that no one had taken seriously the year before. But this time, people were watching, not openly, not asking questions yet, but paying attention, looking for signs that it wasn't real, that it wouldn't work twice. It did. Not perfectly, not in a way that made headlines, but consistently, quietly. By the second season, a few farmers made small changes, not full commitment, just experiments. A strip here, a corner there, testing, without saying they were testing. Some saw results, some didn't, or didn't wait long enough to see them. But the idea had already taken hold. Not everything needed to be controlled. Some things worked better when they were allowed to balance themselves. Years passed. The chemical changed. The products improved. New solutions replaced old ones. But one thing stayed the same. Daniel's field kept producing. Steady, reliable, without chasing the next fix. He never argued about it, never stood at the co-op, never told anyone they were wrong, because he didn't need to. The results spoke for him. One evening, years later, a younger farmer asked him a simple question. Why didn't you follow everyone else? Daniel thought about it for a moment, then answered the same way he always did. Because I've seen what happens when you try to control everything. The young farmer waited, expecting more. There wasn't any. That was the whole lesson. Not complicated, not technical. Just something most people don't learn until it's too late. The problem was never the insects, and the solution was never the chemical. It was understanding what you remove when you try to fix something too quickly. Because sometimes the thing you think is protecting your field is the same thing that's making it weaker. And the thing that looks useless, out of place, even foolish, might be the only reason it survives. Nearly 40 farmers made the same decision. Only one man didn't. And by the end of the season, everyone knew which one had been right.